Okay, let's just dive right in. Have you ever noticed how the word philosophy just makes some people instantly put their guard up? Like it's a trap or something? Well, in this explainer, we're going to completely unpack that. We're going to look at why philosophy is actually this essential, beautiful human endeavor and absolutely nothing we need to be afraid of. We're going to track the grand history of human thought and see exactly how these ancient, wild ideas are still actively shaping the very world we live in right now. So we kind of have to address the elephant in the room right off the bat. Why has philosophy historically gotten such a bad rap, especially in Arab culture? For the longest time, it was just unfairly brushed off as heresy, or disbelief, or just, idle chatter. And that stigma created this cultural hesitancy. It cast a huge shadow over a really sophisticated science that has profoundly impacted human life. It's like we often fear stepping outside the box to explore the unknown because, honestly, it's just easier to take handed-down answers than to rigorously question things. But is that fear actually justified? To figure this out, our agenda today starts with the essence of philosophy itself, how the Greeks founded the human mind, then we'll head east to look at spirit and ethics, dive into the incredible Islamic era of innovation, and finally look at some true pioneers of comprehensive knowledge. All right, Section 1, the essence and importance of philosophy. Because honestly, when you strip away all the fancy jargon, philosophy is just us. It's humanity's relentless, ongoing search for real, convincing answers about what reality actually is. Think about the very first time a human being looked around and just went, why? That's it right there. And the early debates were absolutely wild. You had Heraclitus arguing that literally everything is in a constant state of change. He famously said you can't step in the same river twice, right? Because the water is moving and, well, you are aging and changing. But then Parmenides steps up and completely flips the script, saying change is literally an illusion. All that exists, exists. Boom. That one single disagreement basically set the dynamic stage for centuries of deep thinking about what we are and what we might become. Which brings us to Section 2, Greece, founding the human mind. So this is where those big questions about rivers and existence start getting incredibly organized. Enter Socrates. And you know what's crazy about one of the most famous thinkers literally ever? He didn't write a single thing down, not a word. Everything we know is just from his students taking notes. He basically just walked around asking really brilliant, ironic questions to force people to actually think critically and reform society. He was so dedicated to his democratic principles that when they sentenced him to death for it, he refused to break out of jail. He just chose to drink the poison instead. As the Roman thinker Cicero put it later, Socrates was the guy who brought philosophy down from heaven and planted it right here on earth. And the drama definitely didn't stop there. You had this massive clash between master and student. Plato championed idealism. He believed that true reality existed in this untouchable, perfect, higher world of forms, writing these massive works like the Republic. But his star pupil, Aristotle, he totally rebelled against that. Aristotle was an absolute champion for grounded realism, basically saying, hey, let's bring our focus back down to the actual physical world we can see and observe. I mean, Aristotle literally changed how human beings process information. He wrote this massive book called the Organon, which just means the tool, and laid out 3 basic laws of logic that we still use today. First, the law of identity. A thing is exactly itself. Second, the law of non-contradiction. A statement cannot be both true and false at the exact same time. And third, the law of excluded middle. A statement must be either true or false. There's no in-between. Simple, right? But these weren't just abstract thoughts. They gave humanity a concrete foundational tool to pull actual truth out of what we observe. He basically laid the groundwork for the entire scientific method. Moving right along to Section 3, Philosophers of the East, Spirit and Ethics. Because, let's be super clear, seeking wisdom is absolutely not just a Western thing. It is global, and in the East it was deeply tied to finding inner peace, moral purity, and social justice. Take Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha. The guy was born into total royal luxury, right? He had everything. But he looked at his immense wealth and the super strict caste system that judged everyone's worth by their birth, and he just rejected the whole thing. He argued that your purity and truth aren't about your bloodline. They're achieved through profound meditation, managing your own mind, and letting go of all that materialism. He had this amazing saying, 3 things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. Just let that sink in for a second. That right there captures the whole Eastern philosophical focus. It's all about discovering those massive, universal moral truths that just exist,
completely independently of our messy day-to-day struggles. And while the Buddha was looking inward, over in China, Confucius was building these incredibly practical frameworks for society. He was laser-focused on social justice and good governance, famously pointing out that if a government is bad, being poor is a shame. But if a government is good, being wealthy is a shame. Meanwhile, in Persia, Zoroaster was painting this epic, cosmic picture of morality, this ultimate, eternal battle between light and justice against total darkness.
Then, returning to India, there was Adi Shankara. He only lived to be 32, which is wild, but the mark he left is unbelievable. He pushed back against relying only on pure reason, arguing that our physical senses actually kind of trick us about external reality. He built up this profound idea of non-dualism, basically saying that the individual self and the entire universe are ultimately the exact same thing. It was this gorgeous union of really high-level intellect and deep spiritual devotion. Which takes us to Section 4, Islamic Era, Reconciliation and Innovation. This is arguably the climax of this whole explainer because we are diving straight into the Islamic Golden Age. And if anyone ever tries to tell you that reason and Arab heritage don't mix, this era proves them entirely wrong. Just look at Al-Kindi, the guy they call the first Arab philosopher. Absolute genius. He was effortlessly blending math, physics, chemistry, even music. And he stood right up in the Abbasid courts and bravely said, look, faith and reason are not enemies. Why? Because, as he pointed out, they are both chasing the exact same thing, the ultimate truth and human happiness. He famously said we should never, ever be ashamed to embrace the truth, no matter where it comes from. Then you've got Al-Razi. Now, this guy was a legendary doctor. His massive medical encyclopedia, Al-Hawi, was literally Europe's primary medical reference for 400 years. But as a philosopher, he was a fierce, hardcore rationalist. He firmly believed that logical, rational analysis, which he saw as a gift from God, was the absolute only path to genuine knowledge. And as you can probably imagine, the traditional religious clerics of his time were not super thrilled with that take.
And we definitely can't forget Al-Farabi. His grasp of Aristotle was so next level that people actually called him the second teacher, meaning second only to Aristotle himself. He mapped out this whole idea of a virtuous city, saying society should function exactly like a perfectly healthy human body where every organ cooperates. Oh, and just casually, on top of all that intellectual heavy lifting, he actually went ahead and invented the qanun musical instrument. Talk about range, right?
Finally, Section 5, Pioneers of Comprehensive Knowledge. Now, carrying all this knowledge wasn't easy. These brilliant minds synthesized massive fields of study, and sometimes society really rejected them for daring to think differently. It's actually a deeply moving story. Take Abu Hayyan al-Tawahidi. They called him the philosopher of literature because he wrote so beautifully about friendship and human connection. But in his real life, it was incredibly tragic. He felt so completely isolated, misunderstood, and alienated by his environment that when he was 90 years old, out of pure despair, he gathered up all his books and just burned them. On the flip side of that, you have the absolute powerhouse, Ibn Sina, or Avicenna, as he's known in the West. Get this, he mastered medicine by the time he was 16. His canon of medicine became a global standard. But he didn't just stop at science. He totally rewired abstract philosophy. He deeply analyzed existence, defining it through these concepts of necessity and possibility, basically arguing that everything in the universe is just possible and requires a cause, except for God, who is the only necessary existence. There's this amazing quote from Ibn Sina. The human mind is a force of the soul, not to be underestimated. I just love that. It perfectly sums up what these historic scholars were all about. The human intellect isn't some dangerous thing we need to hide from. It's a massive, divine tool, and we are explicitly meant to use it for rigorous exploration to better humanity. So when we look back over this entire explainer, tracing this huge timeline of human genius, one thing becomes crystal clear. Philosophy is absolutely not a threat to our culture. It's this magnificent, culturally diverse heritage of critical thinking. From Greece to India to China, right through the beating heart of the Islamic Golden Age, it's that fearless pursuit of truth that has literally built the modern world we're sitting in today. I'll leave you with this one final provocative thought to chew on. When we look at the massive, world-changing legacy of all these thinkers who weren't afraid to just ask why, what is our modern fear of exploring outside the box actually keeping us from discovering today? Keep questioning, keep learning, and thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.